The destruction of the Library of Alexandria was the greatest tragedy in the history of human knowledge. You've probably heard this quote before, but what if I told you it might not be entirely true? The story of Alexandria's famous library is more complex than most people realize. From its mysterious founding to its equally mysterious demise, the real history of this ancient institution challenges our assumptions about knowledge and power. Let's explore why this library's legacy continues to captivate us, and how its true story might surprise you. How many books could you read in a lifetime? A few thousand, maybe. Now imagine a place with hundreds of thousands of scrolls. That's the Library of Alexandria for you. It was the ancient world's brain, a massive hub of knowledge that rivaled modern information centers. Why build such a colossal library? It all started with Alexander the Great's dream of creating a city that would be the envy of the world. His successor, Ptolemy I, took this vision further. Ptolemy wanted to create an empire of the mind. Enter the Mauseon, a place that was part temple, part research institute. Scholars from all over the world flocked to Alexandria to study, debate, and create new ideas. They had everything they needed: food, lodging, and most importantly, scrolls. Lots and lots of scrolls. But what secrets did these scrolls hold? That's the million drachma question. The Library of Alexandria collected cutting-edge stuff: mathematics, astronomy, physics, natural history. If it could be written down, they wanted it. And they didn't just want to store this knowledge, they wanted to use it. In a world without printing presses or the internet, having access to this much information was incredibly powerful. The Ptolemies understood this. They were creating an intellectual weapon, a tool to cement their power and influence. The Library of Alexandria was a central hub where all the world's knowledge was gathered, organized, and made accessible, well, to a select few at least. Ancient scholars would travel thousands of miles just to consult the scrolls in Alexandria. But here's the kicker. Getting all those books wasn't exactly legal. The Ptolemies had some pretty creative methods for expanding their collection. Let's just say if you sailed into Alexandria's harbor with a book they didn't have, you might find yourself leaving without it. But that's a story for another scroll. Remember that bit about leaving Alexandria without your books? Well, that was just the beginning. The Ptolemies had a whole playbook of tricks to fill their shelves, and some of them would make modern copyright lawyers faint. How far would they go for knowledge? Let's find out. The Ptolemies wanted every book in the world, every single one, and they weren't too picky about how they got them. Imagine sailing into Alexandria's harbor, excited to trade your goods, only to face a very unusual customs inspection. Papers, please, turned into scrolls, please, as officials combed through ships for any texts they didn't already have. Here's how it went down. If you had a book, the library didn't, they'd borrow it. They'd copy it quickly, then return the copy to you, keeping the original. Not exactly legal, but apparently all was fair in the pursuit of knowledge. But it didn't stop there. The Ptolemies sent out teams of scroll hunters, scouring the known world for rare texts. These guys would go to incredible lengths to track down valuable works, sometimes paying astronomical sums or resorting to less savory methods. Other cities caught on and tried to stop this. Rival libraries started popping up, trying to keep their knowledge local. It was like an ancient information war, with each city trying to outdo the others in their collection. Pergamum, a city in modern-day Turkey, was Alexandria's biggest rival. They got so good at collecting books that the Ptolemies banned the export of papyrus to slow them down. But Pergamum developed a new writing material made from animal skins. We still use the word for it today: parchment. The competition was intense. There are stories of the Ptolemies sending agents to borrow official versions of famous plays from Athens. They'd give an enormous security deposit, get the originals, copy them, and then just forfeit the deposit, keeping the priceless originals. So how big did this library actually get? Ancient sources disagree, but we're talking somewhere between 40,000 and 400,000 scrolls. In a world where books were copied by hand, that's an absolutely staggering number. The Ptolemies built the world's biggest library through a mix of scholarly ambition, political power, and some questionable acquisition methods. But all those scrolls were useless without brilliant minds to study them. And Alexandria attracted some serious geniuses. We're talking about people who changed the course of human knowledge forever. But that's a story for our next chapter. Imagine a place where the greatest minds of ancient times gathered. The Library of Alexandria was that place, a hub for scholars pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. These weren't just any intellectuals. Take Eratosthenes, for example. He calculated the Earth's circumference using a stick, his brain, and some string. On the summer solstice, he noticed the sun was directly overhead in one Egyptian city, but cast a shadow in Alexandria. With some geometry and creative thinking, he got within a few % of the actual value. Pretty impressive for someone who'd never seen a satellite image, right? But Eratosthenes didn't stop there. He also created the first map of the world using latitude and longitude. Think about that next time you use GPS on your phone. You're basically carrying around a piece of his legacy in your pocket. Then there was Herophilus, who challenged conventional wisdom about the human body. When most people thought your personality lived in your heart, Herophilus identified the brain as the controlling organ of the body. He made huge strides in understanding the nervous system, upending centuries of medical beliefs. The library wasn't just about individual geniuses, though. It was a place where ideas collided and sparked new discoveries. Scholars lived, ate, and worked together, bouncing theories off each other over breakfast. It was like an ancient think tank, but with togas instead of suits, and the breakthroughs kept coming. Zenodotus created the first critical edition of Homer's works, laying the foundation for literary criticism. Apollonius wrote epic poetry, showcasing the vast knowledge available at the library. Even engineering got a boost. Hero of Alexandria invented a primitive steam engine centuries before the Industrial Revolution. What made all this innovation possible? Intellectual freedom. The library encouraged diverse perspectives and open inquiry, leading to advancements in math, astronomy, medicine, and countless other fields. But even the brightest flames can't burn forever. The Library of Alexandria's golden age faced challenges that would test its resilience. Forces were already at work that would challenge its dominance. But that's a story for another time. You've probably heard the story 1,000 times. The great Library of Alexandria, consumed by flames, its vast collection of knowledge lost forever. But what if that dramatic inferno was more myth than reality? Let's examine this 2,000-year-old cold case and see what really happened. The library's destruction is often attributed to 3 main culprits: Julius Caesar, early Christians, and Muslim conquerors. But the truth is far more complex. Caesar's involvement stems from 48 BCE, when he accidentally set fire to ships in Alexandria's harbour during a civil war. While the blaze spread to the city, contemporary accounts don't mention the library's destruction. In fact, the geographer Strabo visited Alexandria about 20 years later and described the Mouseion, the research institute housing the library, as still operational. In 391 CE, Theophilus, the bishop of Alexandria, led a mob that destroyed the Serapeum, a temple housing part of the library's collection. However, by this time, the main library had likely been gone for centuries. The Serapeum was more of a satellite library than the primary institution. The Muslim conquest in 642 CE spawned a tale of Caliph Omar ordering the destruction of the library's books. But this story doesn't appear in historical records until about 300 years after the supposed event, leading most historians to dismiss it as myth. So what really happened to the Library of Alexandria? The truth is less dramatic but more relatable. It seems the library didn't experience a single catastrophic event, but rather a gradual decline over centuries. Political instability, shifting priorities, and simple neglect likely played larger roles than any fire or zealot. Alexandria was a dynamic port city, changing hands between various rulers. Each new regime had its own agenda, and maintaining a massive library wasn't always a top priority. Scholars moved on to other centers of learning, and fragile scrolls deteriorated without proper care. The fate of the Library of Alexandria serves as a reminder that sometimes the greatest threat to knowledge isn't dramatic destruction, but the quiet erosion of time and indifference. The reality is messier and more nuanced than a single catastrophic event, and in many ways more representative of how history often unfolds. The Library of Alexandria's fate may have been less fiery than legend suggests, but its impact was undeniably explosive. This ancient institution wielded a power more potent than any flame. Let's explore how the Library of Alexandria became a weapon that shaped empires and altered the course of history. The library was storing knowledge, yes, but more importantly, it was weaponizing it. How do you control an empire? You control its information. The Ptolemies understood this better than anyone. They were creating an intellectual arsenal. Consider the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. This wasn't just a scholarly project, it was a political act. By producing an official Greek version, the Ptolemies asserted their authority over religious texts, shaping power structures across the Mediterranean. The library's influence extended beyond religious texts. It became a center for standardizing texts and creating authoritative versions of works. This was about power. By controlling which versions were considered official, the Ptolemies could influence how people thought about history, politics, and culture. Now, who decides what's worth keeping? That's where things get really interesting. The scholars at Alexandria weren't passive collectors. They actively shaped the canon of human knowledge, deciding which works were important enough to be copied, studied, and preserved. This had huge implications for the ancient world's power dynamics. Alexandria became more than just a city. It was the intellectual capital of the Mediterranean. Scholars flocked there from all over. Kings and emperors sought the library's approval. Having your work included in the collection was like getting a stamp of approval from the ancient world's most prestigious institution. But how did this single building shape human knowledge for centuries? By setting the standard for what was considered important knowledge. The texts preserved and studied there became the foundation for much of Western science, literature, and philosophy. Even after the library's decline, its influence lived on through the scholars it had trained and the ideas it had spread. Yet this dominance over knowledge came at a price. While it preserved vast amounts of information, it also created a kind of intellectual bottleneck, and as with any concentration of power, there were consequences. But that's a story for our next chapter. The Library of Alexandria's brilliance cast a long shadow, and we're still feeling its effects today. When all the world's information is concentrated in one spot, it creates some serious problems. The Ptolemies were creating an intellectual monopoly. The library became the gatekeeper of what was considered important knowledge. If your work wasn't in Alexandria, did it even exist? This centralization had a dark side. The library's focus on Greek texts meant that works from other cultures often got sidelined. Egyptian, Babylonian, and other traditions, not Greek enough. It's like if Google decided to only index websites in English. You'd still have a lot of information, but you'd be missing out on a whole world of knowledge. And it gets worse. The library's scholars were creating definitive versions of texts. In practice, this meant erasing diversity. Take Homer's works. There were multiple versions floating around the ancient world, each with its own quirks and local flavors. But once Alexandria created the official version, those other interpretations started to disappear. Now let's talk about lost knowledge. Early philosophies from Egypt and the Near East, probably gone. Scientific discoveries that didn't fit with Greek theories, lost to time. It's like someone deleted a huge chunk of humanity's hard drive. The library's influence was so strong that it discouraged the development of other intellectual centers. Scholars started to leave Alexandria for places like Pergamon and Rhodes, just to escape the Ptolemaic regime's overshadowing influence. So what secrets did the Library of Alexandria hold about controlling information? Whoever controls knowledge controls power. The Ptolemies used the library to shape their empire's intellectual landscape. They decided what was worth preserving and what wasn't. And in doing so, they may have stunted human progress in ways we're only beginning to understand. Yet even as the library declined, its influence spread. The idea of a universal repository of knowledge didn't die with Alexandria. It evolved. And that evolution, well, that's a whole other story. Imagine a library whose ideas could survive 1,500 years of silence. The Library of Alexandria didn't simply vanish. Its knowledge went underground, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. How did these ancient ideas manage to persist and spread? Knowledge, it turns out, is remarkably resilient. Even as the physical library declined, its ideas were already spreading across the ancient world. Picture intellectual seeds scattered on the wind, taking root wherever they landed. One key landing spot, the Islamic world during its golden age. As Europe stumbled through the Dark Ages, scholars in Baghdad, Cairo, and other Muslim cities preserved and expanded on Alexandria's knowledge. They built on ancient texts, advancing science and philosophy in ways that would have impressed the Alexandrian scholars. Take mathematics. Those Greek geometry texts the library collected? Muslim scholars used them as a foundation, developing algebra and pushing trigonometry forward. In astronomy, they built on Ptolemy's work, creating more accurate star charts and inventing new tools to study the stars. This knowledge didn't stay put. As trade routes opened between the Islamic world and Europe, these ideas began flowing westward. Latin translations of Arabic texts, often themselves translations of Greek works from Alexandria, started appearing in European monasteries and early universities. Speaking of universities, ever wonder about their origins? While it's not a direct line from Alexandria to Oxford, the idea of a centralized place of learning, with scholars from different fields working side by side, definitely has echoes of the ancient Mausion. Alexandria's influence is hard to overstate. The Renaissance, scientific revolution, and Enlightenment all have roots that can be traced back, at least in part, to ideas preserved and developed there. But who were the brilliant minds behind the library's most famous discoveries? We've met Eratosthenes with his earth-measuring string and Herophilus peering into the human body. There were so many others. Euclid, whose geometry still challenges students today. Archimedes, who may have developed some of his groundbreaking ideas while studying in Alexandria. The list goes on. The Library of Alexandria's physical form may have crumbled, but its essence, the pursuit of knowledge, the mixing of ideas, the drive to understand our world, lived on. It's a testament to human curiosity and the enduring nature of ideas. But as this intellectual legacy spread around the world, the physical library faced a much quieter threat, a threat that would ultimately prove more dangerous than any fire or conqueror. The Library of Alexandria's decline wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was a slow, gradual process that teaches us more about preserving knowledge than any dramatic destruction could. Libraries don't just vanish overnight, they fade away. Alexandria's decline was a slow-motion tragedy. Imagine a once bustling hub of learning gradually emptying out, its halls echoing with fading memories of past debates. What caused this? Even the mightiest centers of knowledge are vulnerable to something as mundane as budget cuts. During the Roman period, Alexandria's fortunes took a downturn. Roman emperors weren't consistent in their support for this Egyptian wonder. Some backed it, others didn't. For a massive library, inconsistent funding spells trouble. Maintenance gets postponed, scrolls deteriorate. You end up with a building full of crumbling papyrus. That's what happened in Alexandria. Many scrolls were lost over time, especially during the political turmoil of the 3rd century AD. Money wasn't the only issue. Political instability had scholars leaving for safer places. When the brains leave, knowledge follows. It's a literary brain drain, leaving Alexandria's intellectual reserves depleted. Here's something crucial: papyrus doesn't last forever. In Alexandria's humid climate, scrolls could start falling apart within a century. Librarians needed to constantly copy and maintain texts just to keep the collection intact. No funding meant no copying, and no copying meant no library. How much knowledge was lost to neglect? We can't say for sure, but we're talking potentially thousands of texts. Literature, scientific treatises, historical accounts, all slowly crumbling in forgotten corners. The decline hit a critical point in 297 AD, when the Roman Emperor Diocletian besieged Alexandria. We don't know exactly what happened to the library, but a city under siege isn't great for preserving books. Alexandria wasn't alone in this fate. Other famous libraries, like the one in Pergamon, faced similar declines. It's a common pattern: grand cultural institutions falling victim to changing political winds and neglect. So what really caused the downfall of history's most famous library? No dramatic flames, no conquering hordes. Well, mostly. Just the quiet tragedy of forgetting, of priorities shifting, of knowledge slipping away. As Alexandria's influence waned, other centers of learning emerged. The torch of knowledge never really goes out. It gets passed along, finding new homes and new caretakers. But that's a story for another time. As Alexandria's influence waned, new centers of learning emerged across the Mediterranean. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does knowledge. The decline of the Great Library created an opportunity that rival cities seized. Pergamon, a city in modern-day Turkey, became Alexandria's biggest rival. When the Ptolemies banned papyrus exports to slow Pergamon's book collection, it backfired. The clever folks there developed a new writing material from animal skins: parchment. The word comes from Pergamena, a nod to the city that invented it out of necessity. Rome, the rising superpower, joined the race for knowledge. At first, Roman libraries came from the spoils of war. Imagine conquering a city and carting off its entire library. That's what happened when the Romans defeated the Macedonian king Perseus in 168 BCE. Over time, Rome's approach evolved. What started as war trophies became public institutions. Julius Caesar planned a public library in Rome, a dream realized by Augustus after Caesar's death. These weren't just scroll storage, they were centers of learning, debate, and culture. These new centers changed the game by decentralizing knowledge. No longer was there a single library of libraries. Ideas overlooked in Alexandria now had a chance to flourish elsewhere. The fall of Alexandria's library actually sped up the spread of knowledge. As scholars fled, they took their expertise and often copies of important texts with them. Alexandria's intellectual legacy exploded outward, seeding new learning centers across the Mediterranean. The impact on human knowledge was profound. We lost the convenience of having everything in one place, but gained something more valuable: resilience. With knowledge spread out, it became harder for any single disaster to wipe out centuries of human learning. Yet Alexandria's ghost wasn't done haunting us. The myth of its destruction would shape how we think about knowledge and loss for centuries to come. But that's a story for another scroll. Alexandria's ghost may have faded, but its final chapter was far from written. In fact, the most captivating tale about the Great Library emerged centuries after its decline. Picture this: ancient manuscripts used as kindling for public baths. Sounds absurd, right? Yet this story captured imaginations for generations. Let's see where it leads us. The library was gone, but its legend only grew. Enter the most unlikely villain in this tale, a 13th century Christian bishop named Gregory Bar Hebraeus. He's the one who first penned the story that would shape our view of history for centuries to come. According to Bar Hebraeus, when the Muslim army captured Alexandria in 642 CE, General Amr ibn al-As sought guidance from Caliph Omar about what to do with the books. Omar's supposed response: if the books agree with the Quran, we don't need them. If they disagree, we don't want them. And just like that, Alexandria's intellectual treasures became fuel for the city's public baths. Here's the catch. This story appears 600 years after it supposedly happened. That's like someone today writing about events from the 15th century without any supporting evidence. Modern scholars have dismissed this account as pure fiction, with no contemporary evidence to back it up. So why has this myth persisted for so long? Well, it's a pretty dramatic story, isn't it? A single catastrophic event that wipes out centuries of knowledge. It's the kind of tale that sticks in your mind. Plus, it plays into some deeper cultural narratives. During the Enlightenment, this story was often used to paint institutional religion as an enemy of knowledge and progress. But here's the thing: the truth is far less exciting. The Library of Alexandria likely declined gradually over centuries due to budget cuts, political instability, and simple neglect. Not as thrilling as a fiery destruction, but probably closer to reality. The myth has become a powerful symbol of the fragility of knowledge and the consequences of ideological conflicts. You'll find references to the burning of the library in countless books, movies, and TV shows. It's a shorthand for the loss of irreplaceable cultural heritage. So what's the truth behind the library's supposed destruction by Muslim conquerors? Simply put, it didn't happen. The library had likely ceased to exist as a major institution centuries before the Muslim conquest of Egypt. In the end, does the truth matter as much as the story? That's a tricky question. While historical accuracy is crucial, myths like this one reveal a lot about how we view knowledge, power, and the past. Maybe the real lesson here isn't about what happened to the library, but about how we tell stories about our history and why those stories matter. The dream of universal knowledge didn't end with the ancient Library of Alexandria. It transformed into something far more expansive: the Internet. Today we're building a new Alexandria with servers and data instead of stone and papyrus. Think about it. Wikipedia, with its millions of articles in hundreds of languages, is like a digital mouseion. Google Books aims to digitize every book ever published. We're creating a vast repository of knowledge that would astound the ancient Ptolemies. But have we learned from history's mistakes? The ancient library centralized knowledge, making it vulnerable. Our modern digital library is different, but it faces its own challenges. While we have more information at our fingertips than ever before, access isn't equal. The digital divide creates new forms of inequality, mirroring the exclusivity of the ancient library. Preservation is another key issue. Ancient scrolls could last centuries with proper care, but digital formats become obsolete quickly. How many of us can still read a floppy disk? We're creating more information than ever, but we might be losing it just as rapidly. In scale, we've surpassed the ancient library by orders of magnitude, but in vulnerability, we might be more at risk than ever. Our digital knowledge isn't confined to one location, though. It's distributed, backed up, and mirrored across the globe. We're developing new storage technologies and archival methods to preserve digital information for the long term. The story of Alexandria continues, written in bits and bytes instead of ink and papyrus. We're the new librarians, scholars, and custodians of knowledge. The question is, how will we preserve our collective wisdom for future generations? That's a story we're still writing, one bite at a time. Remember how we talked about preserving knowledge for future generations? Well, in 2002, something extraordinary happened. The Bibliotheca Alexandrina opened its doors, a modern recreation of the ancient Library of Alexandria. This isn't just a building with books. It's an ambitious attempt to revive the spirit of its ancient predecessor. The new library, designed by a Norwegian architectural firm, sits near the original site. It's a symbolic link between past and future. Inside, you'll find millions of books, manuscripts, and digital resources, but the Bibliotheca Alexandrina goes beyond storage. It's a cultural center hosting conferences, exhibitions, and events that bring together minds from around the world. Now think about the challenges. Funding remains a constant struggle, and attracting top scholars in a competitive global landscape isn't easy. There's also the question of relevance in the age of Google and Wikipedia. But here's where things get interesting. The new library is evolving. They're embracing the digital age, working on massive projects to preserve fragile manuscripts and make knowledge accessible to everyone, not just visitors. What does this mean for the future of human knowledge? The Bibliotheca Alexandrina is creating a new hub for learning and cultural exchange in the Middle East and beyond. By collaborating with institutions worldwide, they're building a global network of knowledge that's more resilient than its ancient predecessor. So what modern institution is trying to revive the spirit of the ancient library? That's right, it's the Bibliotheca Alexandrina. But it's not alone. This project is part of a larger movement to preserve and share human knowledge on a global scale. The ancient dream of universal knowledge is finding new forms in our digital age. The story of Alexandria isn't over. It's beginning a new chapter. And who knows? Maybe centuries from now, people will look back at the Bibliotheca Alexandrina as a catalyst for a new renaissance of learning. One thing's for sure. The quest to gather and preserve human knowledge is far from over. It's evolving, adapting, and finding new ways to illuminate the dark corners of human understanding. The Library of Alexandria's impact goes far beyond its physical contents. Its legacy lives on in our collective memory, shaping how we think about knowledge, loss, and human potential for centuries. Alexandria acts like a mirror, reflecting our hopes and fears about progress. When we imagine ancient wisdom going up in smoke, we're grappling with our own anxieties about civilization's fragility. Could it happen again? Are we one disaster away from losing everything? This fascination with lost knowledge runs deep. Look at how many books and movies revolve around rediscovering ancient secrets. It's like we're all hoping for a reset button on human wisdom. But forgetting is dangerous. When we lose touch with our past, we risk repeating old mistakes. At the same time, remembering is powerful. The idea of Alexandria has inspired countless efforts to gather and share knowledge. From universities to the internet, we keep trying to recreate that dream of universal wisdom. So what can Alexandria's story teach us? For starters, don't take knowledge for granted. We need to actively preserve and share what we know, but it also warns against centralization. Putting all our eggs in one basket makes knowledge vulnerable. Diversity is strength. The more places information exists, the harder it is to lose. We should embrace multiple ways of knowing and remembering. And maybe most importantly, we should never stop questioning and exploring. The library's true spirit wasn't in its shelves, but in the curious minds of its scholars. Here's a wild thought. The greatest library isn't made of stone or papyrus. It's us. Every person carries a unique collection of experiences and ideas. Together, we form a living, breathing Alexandria that's always growing and changing. The Library of Alexandria lives on, not as a single edifice, but as a distributed network of knowledge. Every time we open a book, search online, or ask a question, we're tapping into that ancient wellspring of wisdom. The library's spirit persists in our curiosity and our relentless drive to understand the world around us. Consider this: the device in your pocket holds more information than the entire ancient world had access to. That's pretty mind-bending, right? We've become living, breathing repositories of human knowledge, each of us carrying a fragment of our collective wisdom. So what will you do with your piece of this modern Alexandria? The possibilities are endless. Every time we learn something new, we're adding our own contribution to that grand old library. The story of Alexandria continues, evolving with each curious mind that seeks to understand, share, and build upon our shared knowledge. Your engagement with this vast repository of information isn't just about personal growth. It's about participating in the ongoing expansion of human understanding.